so beautiful. To me.
If that were true, it would be good news, wouldn't it? If that's how God thought about you. You know, when Jesus started his gig, he showed up on the first day and he said this: "Time's up. I'm here to give you good news. Change the way you think about everything and begin a life with God." And I have found that for most of us, myself certainly, the biggest thing I have to change, the two biggest things I have to change my mind about are who I think I fundamentally am, and that's reflected in my self-talk, right? And who I think God fundamentally is, and that's reflected by my fear of him. Jesus came to unpack a God who has been there all along, but who has been completely hidden behind a veil of anger and smoke and mirrors. And I love the way he unpacked it. And so this morning, I want you to understand that God is like a relentless lover. Now, I don't mean like in a Fatal Attraction kind of way. I want to unpack this, and there's no way I'm going to be able to do it today, because it's more who God is, I think, than any other metaphor I could come up with. And it's actually not my metaphor. It's a metaphor that writers in the First Testament, the Older Testament, use in ways that are graphic and kind of surprising. And it makes me wonder why the angry version gets all the attention. I mean, when you think of God in the First Testament, you think of someone who is angry and just waiting to kind of commit genocide whenever he possibly can. Oh, yeah, I'd love to wipe out that group. And in that kind of mindset, there are still human beings today around the globe who look at a God that way and take it as kind of an invitation to participate in that. And I have to say this morning that our version, our view of what and who God is will really fuel the way we not only look at ourselves, but look at one another. And so if we think that God is completely other, separate, and a little bit put off, then we will look at people that aren't like us or don't agree with us, or maybe even who are like us and who agree with us, we will look at them as other and separate, and we'll kind of live in this constant state of being put off. Now, every month we'll find a new reason to be a little sideways with everybody, right? Maybe this, it may be that, it may be the way you treated me, it may be the way that you wore that shirt, that may be the way that you, whatever it is, but there's this constant inclination to be like the God that we assume exists. And so my quest for this series was to unpack just briefly and incompletely what that God, what our God, and when I say our God, I'm not talking about our God as opposed to anybody else's God. I am using the broadest our to say humanity. What is our God really like? This is how you spell his name in Hebrew. Yod, He, Vav, He, Yahweh. I love that. You have to understand that he's not a stoic God who kind of waits patiently at some distance until we come to him. He is the one who is on a quest for you. That's new for a lot of people. God is actually on a quest for you. Which makes sense because of what he named this church. One day that sign just appeared, kind of like the Ten Commandments. God is on a quest for you. And the amazing thing is, you don't really get that until you begin a search for him. And when you find her, you realize it wasn't you who was initially doing the looking. It's quite an interesting way to look at it. And I want us to understand this from the perspective that God is a relentless quester. Relentless. I love that word. I love the word relentless. When you're talking about someone like in sports or someone who is, don't you just love to see someone who is rewarded after a relentless pursuit of whatever it is? Like in school. Someone who relentlessly works hard and then finally gets that A. Or in sports, someone who works hard for 108 years and finally can go to the World Series. It's relentless for these poor Cubs fans, but they're in. And if it's not the Giants, then I'm happy for them. Relentless is just continuing without becoming weaker or less severe. It just means you show up every day and you do the same thing over and over and over. You're relentless. God is like that. God is relentless, but God is relentless in I suppose I couldn't say just one thing because I'm sure there are more, but this morning I want us to understand that God's relentless in His pursuit of us. He's after you. Now, I don't mean He's after you like a cop car with the siren on. That's what we think, right? You know that feeling when you didn't know if you were going too fast and then you see the motorcycle cop in the shadows and you go, and he doesn't pull out and you go, oh. That's not what I'm talking about. A pursuit is just an effort to secure or attain something, a quest. Like the pursuit of happiness. You show up every day relentlessly pursuing, and God has a relentless pursuit. What is it? It's you. Most of us have never conceived of this kind of relentless and pursuing love. Never thought about love this way. Never thought about God this way. God is not a neat theological concept. He is not neat. God is a lover in pursuit. And the First Testament explains this in such graphic detail, but we missed it. In fact, a lot of us, if you're going to read the Bible, do you turn to the book of Hosea? Hosea, is that in there? Right? Do you go to Ezekiel or a lot of us will go to the Psalms, but do you go to the minor prophets like, there's a book of the Bible written by a guy named Amos, and that's the name of his book? Amos? Do you go to Amos when you really have 15 minutes and you want to read something? I don't, most of us don't. Most of us turn to the second half, the Newer Testament, and we read something in there, especially about the life of the rabbi, and that's where we spend our time. But there are these minor prophets, minor because they have these short little books in the First Testament that unpack a God that a lot of us can't really come to grips with him being real. One of the writers in the First Testament wrote this wonderful book called Song of Solomon. Have you read that? Song of Solomon is a love story. Now, I think that it was probably a love story between a man and a woman, but in a metaphorical way, it's a love story between God and humanity. And there is this fuller sense when you begin to read it that you say, this is not just talking about these two people. Listen to this passage from the Song of Solomon. This is chapter 8. It's in your notes. God writes, hang my locket around your neck, wear my ring on your finger. Remember the first time you asked someone to wear your... Do they still do that in school? Will you wear my... Yeah, they don't do that anymore, do they? Yeah, that's... My mother talks about, and my father, I was just there not long ago, a few weeks ago, and they talked about when my father gave my mother his letterman's ring. Remember those days? And remember, ladies, if you were old enough, you wrapped yarn around it because it was so big, and then you put it on your finger, or you wore it on a necklace around your neck, and that thing said, Okay, taken, right? God says, hang my locket around your neck, wear my ring on your finger. Love is an invincible facing danger and death. Passion laughs at the terrors of hell. The fire of love stops at nothing. It sweeps everything before it. Floodwaters can't drown love. Torrents of rain can't put it out. Love can't be bought. Love can't be sold. It's not found in the marketplace. God is in a relentless pursuit of you, and it's because of love. God is like a relentless lover. Now, I want to skip to the very end of your notes to clarify something that I was thinking I would say at the end as kind of like the big finish, right? But we need to have it in mind right now, because I want to be sure we're all talking about love in the same way. And I know right now that we're not. I'm not sure if there is a word that is more multifaceted in its definition than love. So turn to the end of your notes for just a second. I want to just give you 3 statements about God's love. God's love is not like our love. His love is unpossessive. What does that mean? It means when God is pursuing you, it's not to own you, control you. God's love is pure because it needs nothing. Have you ever heard somebody say, you know what? You're not really meeting my needs anymore. Okay. Then get out. That's what you should answer that by. Well, you're not meeting my needs, and so I no longer love you. You understand how backwards that is? How distorted that is? Now, I understand that all humanity has needs. You have to understand that God doesn't. That God's choice of love is not because He's incomplete without you. In fact, God seeks us not to complete Himself, but to complete us. Remember that great line? All of the women in the theater begin crying. Right after you had me, before you had me at hello, right? You complete me. Well, actually, that's one of the most ridiculous things anyone ever said to another human being. Now, I get it. There's a deep connection and a wonder. But if you can't be complete without me, you're in trouble, right? Because I may get hit with a bus tomorrow. So God is complete without us, but chooses to reach out to love us because His love completes us. And the only person that's not going to get hit by a bus tomorrow is God. The reason that God said, don't put anything else in the God spot, commandment number 1, don't have any other gods before me, is not because He's an egocentric control freak. It's because God knows that if you stick anything else, any other being or object in that space, in the biggest place of your heart, that you will be disappointed. Because everything and everyone in your life, so again, let's just talk about reality for just a second. Everything and everyone in your life will disappoint you someday. Right? I mean, I love my wife with every corpuscle, but I know that I will disappoint her. And now it might be something as stupid as forgetting to pick up something from the store, or it may be something bigger than that. But if I'm living my life so thinking that no one's going to disappoint me, I'm going to be what? Disappointed. The only one who won't is the one that relentlessly pursues my soul. That is the most amazing news to me. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about God's love. We have to understand that you can't get to God's love by understanding human love. Now, human love is the closest that we have. And there is this, the more I kind of come into relationship with God and allow God to kind of incarnate in me, the more fully I am centered in that real love and less in the kind of fantasy love. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with a good romance, right? A good romantic comedy, but you have to understand, as far as reality goes, it's full of crap. You get that, right? This is not how life works. You are not going to fly to London and meet the man of your dreams and then get swept off your feet, and then his sister marries your brother, and then the snow starts falling on Christmas Eve. That's not the way life works. It would be wonderful, but that's just not the way life works. And every relationship we're in is work. Love takes work. And so in his relentless pursuit of us, God's deepest desire is to help us understand that, because his love completes us. One of Marin's favorite writers is this wonderful woman, right, named Anne Lamott. She wrote several years ago a book called Traveling Mercies, and in that book she wrote something that has not left my mind since Lynn read it to me. And I want to read the quote to you. This is a long time ago in Anne Lamott's life. She became pregnant by a man who she did not love and whose child she did not want to carry. And so her friend convinced her to abort the pregnancy. She talks about the pain and the horror of it all. And then she begins in page 50 of this book to say this: "Several hours later, the blood stopped flowing, and I got in bed shaking and sad, too wild to have another drink or take a sleeping pill. I had a cigarette and turned off the light. After a while, as I lay there, I became aware of someone with me, hunkered down in the corner, and I just assumed it was my father, whose presence I had felt over the years when I was frightened and alone. The feeling was so strong that I actually turned on the light for a moment to make sure no one was there. Of course there wasn't, but after a while, in the dark again, I knew beyond any doubt that it was God. I felt him as surely as my dog lying nearby as I write this. And I was appalled. I thought about my life and my brilliant, hilarious, progressive friends. I thought about what everyone would think of me if I became a follower of Christ, and it seemed an utterly impossible thing that simply I could not allow to happen. I turned to the wall and said out loud, 'I would rather die than choose you.' I felt him just sitting there on his haunches in the corner of my sleeping loft, watching me with patience and love, and I squinched my eyes shut, but that didn't help because that's not what I was seeing him with. Finally, I fell asleep, and in the morning, he was gone. This experience spooked me so badly, but I thought it was just an apparition, born of fear and self-loathing and booze and loss of blood. But then everywhere I went, I had the feeling that this little cat was following me, wanting me to reach down and pick it up, wanting me to open the door and let it in, but I knew what would happen. You let a cat in one time, give it a little milk, and then it stays forever. So I tried to keep one step ahead of it, slamming my houseboat door whenever I entered or left. And 1 week later, I went back to this little church. I was so hungover that I couldn't stand up for the songs. And this time I stayed for the sermon, which I just thought was so ridiculous. Like someone trying to convince me of the existence of extraterrestrials. But the last song was so deep and raw and pure that I could not escape. It was as if the people were singing in between the notes, weeping and joyfully at the same time, and I felt like their voices or something was rocking me in its bosom, holding me like a scared kid. And I opened up to that feeling, and it washed over me. I began to cry, and I left before the benediction, and I raced home and felt this little cat running at my heels, and I walked down the dock past dozens of potted flowers under a sky as blue as one of God's own dreams, and I opened the door to my houseboat, and I stood there a moment, and I hung my head, and I said, "Blanket, I quit." And I took a long, deep breath, and I said out loud, "All right, you can come in." And this was the moment of my beautiful conversion. That's the way this works. God pursues us like a relentless lover. The way you pursue your child who is struggling and you know is making bad decisions. And I'm so glad. This pursuit began in my life in the early 70s. I felt it as a young teenager. And my mother and I would attend St. Pius X Catholic Church in Tucson, Arizona. We lived there for a very short period of time in the early 70s. And every time the priest walked in, he looked just like Jesus. It was 1972, right? So it was awesome. Long hair, bare feet. We had this folk band up front. Jesus is just all right with me. And I heard God whispering my name. And I was terrified. Because I thought at that time that what he was asking from me was to become a priest. And as a 13-year-old boy, I knew that I was going to have to make a decision between God and girls. And it was a crisis for me. I wanted to say yes to this voice that I heard somehow, but I knew that it wasn't going to be possible. And so later, in 1975, when someone explained, not all spiritual advisors are celibate, I said, what? And I became a Baptist. What a mistake that was. And now I kind of start every day with, hi, I'm Joe. I'm a Baptist. And Baptist Anonymous, it's good. So let's just unpack this just a little bit. God is constantly asking all throughout the Scriptures, where are you? In fact, it's the first question he asks. Garden of Eden, Genesis 3, Adam and Eve go off on their own. And what does God say? Well, I'm going to wait right here. I didn't make them do that. It was their own free will, and they know where I am when they want to find me. We have the earliest version of a Hebrew God that's so elementary, but even this version of the Hebrew God goes searching in the garden and says, Adam, and you know what the Hebrew word Adam means, right? We've talked about this. The word Adam means mankind in Hebrew. Mankind, where are you? This God is searching for us. Jesus, thousands of years later, Jesus tells two parables that are remarkable and that hit me like a ton of bricks this week. You know, we just did this sermon series on the parables, right? And we kind of left an open-ended question, and you talked about it in community groups. But in Matthew 13, there are these two stories that Jesus tells that I see now are remarkably complementary couplets. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, Jesus says. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought the field. You see this? The kingdom of heaven is what? Is what? A treasure. Now, I don't know if you've ever read it this closely. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure. Very next verse. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for treasure. Oh, wait a second. How can the kingdom of heaven be like treasure and also be like a merchant looking for treasure? Reading over this week, and all of a sudden, I had this kind of, I don't know what it is. And I thought to myself, The first one's about us. The second one's about God. And who's the pearl of great price? You are. God is the shopkeeper. God is the merchant looking for a pearl of great price. We are the man who finds a treasure hidden in a field and then sells everything and buys it. While God is looking for us, we're looking for Him. And we run into each other somewhere. I love that. All throughout the Scriptures, God is pictured as one who is searching. I love this passage in the book of Ezekiel, and I go there just so that you know even the books that you don't spend a lot of time in. Listen to this. This is what God says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As the shepherd looks after the scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out and gather them from other places, and I will bring them into their own home. I will lead them to pasture on the hills of Israel. What's God up to? He's searching. Now, does that remind you of another passage that you know? Jesus shows up and he says this: the kingdom of heaven is like a shepherd who has 100 sheep. This is Luke chapter 15. One of them goes off and gets lost, and the shepherd, God, leaves the 99 and goes after the one. Now, this is the most ridiculous business idea, right? I want you to think about this, and let's play this out. It's so important. If you have 99% of your assets tied up somewhere, and you lose 1% of your assets, you do not go and try to recover the 1% while leaving the 99% unprotected, right? You just write that off. And in most businesses, if you only have 1% loss, you're like, hooray! That's awesome. Unless you know the name of the 1%. Unless that 1% is Joe, or Brian, or Tobias. Then you leave and you do whatever you have to do to go and find that one. You see, because to a good shepherd, a sheep isn't an asset. It's like a child. Luke 19, Jesus said, I have come here to seek and to save that which is lost. See, when Jesus showed up, let me just unpack this for a second. When Jesus showed up, he grew up in a very harsh place, this little town called Nazareth. And he was born somewhere around 6 BC. We don't know exactly. But we know who were the world leaders when he was born because the New Testament tells us. And in that time frame, in Nazareth, a town that exists in Palestine, in Israel, horrible things were happening because of Roman power. And when Jesus was probably somewhere around 10, he saw a whole other community obliterated because there was an uprising there, and Rome came in and crushed it. Jesus lost friends, boyhood friends in that. He saw Rome take advantage of people, but he saw something else that really bothered him. He saw the temple system, the Jewish law, taking advantage of people and not helping them at all. And as he grew, and as he spent time in the synagogue learning about this God that Ezekiel and the Psalms and other places unpacks, he says, wait a second, that's not what God is like. God is searching for us. And so when he became old enough to be the rabbi, when he was 30, and he started teaching, 5,000 people would show up. Why? Because they were so tired of hearing about a God who hated their guts. And now, the people who taught about that God couldn't put up with this, and so what did they do? They killed him. Because if God isn't angry with people, then people aren't going to spend money on sacrifices to appease his anger, and I'm going to lose my job. God is constantly saying, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? I have so much more to say about that. You know, this is the great thing about God. You know when you were dating, if you dated, if you didn't, it's okay. Saved yourself a lot of trouble. First date, you're not like all that fully open about who you really are, right? In fact, if you began dating online, first date, you hope that the other person wouldn't find out that you're not really like a millionaire, like your profile says. But here's the amazing thing. When God is in this pursuit of us, and this is what I think, someone kind of really likes me and kind of wants to hang out with me, I think, well, yeah, but if they really knew me, then, oh, the shoe's going to fall, right? But what God says is, wait a second, the beautiful thing about this is in Psalm 139, God says, no, I already know who you are, and I still want you. Listen to this. Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, God. You hem me in behind and before. You've laid your hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And David goes on to say, God knows me. God knows you. See, this is like stop whatever you're thinking about for a second. It doesn't matter what you've done or what no one else knows about you. God knows it. And He is absolutely crazy about you. He knows it. He knows what stupid things you've done. He knows how you hurt yourself and other people. He knows what you think about when you're all by yourself. And He also knows the beautiful things you've done. All of these things do not matter to Him because He knows that you do not do those things because of who you are. You do those things because of who you think you have to be. And God does not love your ego. See, this is the beautiful thing about God, the thing that blows me away. You know what your ego is, right? It's the Joe Everly that I create so that I'm liked. The one that I let you see, right? The mask that I create. I live in that so often. And when I realize that God doesn't even see that, He looks right through it and sees the real me. What He sees is the me I could become. He knows what He's getting, and He still picks me. Reminds me of kickball. Remember those red playground balls? And as an exercise in self-esteem, you pick two captains, and then you pick other people based on their athletic skill. I'll take Bob, I'll take you. And you're the last one in line, you're thinking, And then you get up, and what if the first person picked gets out every time? The captain finally says, I wouldn't have picked you if I knew what I was getting. God will never say that. He knows what He's getting, and He chooses you. But as I said, God is in the pursuit of the real you, not the you you've created to survive. We talked about this last week, and I can't spend the time this morning, but Jesus said, if you save your life, your false life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life, your false life, for my sake, you will find life. You have to kill the beast. Listen to this passage. This is another passage from the First Testament. People will be told, don't be afraid. Dear people, don't despair. Your God is present among you. A strong warrior there to save you. Happy to have you back. He will calm you with His love and delight you with His songs. This goes a step too far. This is God who's under your window with a guitar. Oh, Joe, I hope you really know I love you, oh Joe, oh Joe. Shut up, God! He will calm you with his love and delight you with his songs. You have to understand, God does not love. God is love. And so when you come in proximity to this God, it is no wonder that you're loved. One of the most brutal books in all of the Bible is the book of Hosea. Hosea is a prophet. And God comes to him one day and says, Hosea, yes, God, I want you to marry a prostitute. Go find a woman who sells herself and marry her. And Hosea does. And they have 3 children. But the woman is restless and leaves Hosea. In fact, Hosea has suspicions that all through their marriage she's left many times and doesn't even know that all 3 of those children are his. And so one night the woman doesn't come home and Hosea goes and finds her and she has allied herself, sold herself to another pimp, and God says, Hosea, I want you to go, her name is Gomer, I want you to go and purchase her back. And Hosea goes and purchases her back. And this goes on and on. Why? This book, the whole book, is a living parable of God's love. You see, God is like Hosea, and I am like Gomer. And God comes after me and buys me back. And God comes after me and buys me back. And God comes after me and buys me back again and 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 again. Sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Why? Because God is not able to not do that, because God is love. 1 Corinthians 13, let me just read it. You know it. You read it, you read it. We read it at weddings and stuff. It's not really talking about romantic love, although it's a good definition of love, and so it can. It's really talking about what God is. Paul writes, and he says, if I speak with human eloquence and angelic ecstasy, but I don't love, I'm nothing but the creaking of a rusty gate. If I speak God's word with power, revealing all his mysteries and making everything as plain as day, and if I have faith that says to a mountain, jump, and it jumps, but I don't love, I'm nothing. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't love, I've gotten nowhere. So no matter what I say, what I believe, what I do, listen to that. No matter what people say, what people believe, wait a second, what I believe? No matter what people say, what people believe, or what people do, no matter what people and myself say and believe and do, I am bankrupt without love. So it's possible to say the right things, to believe the right things, and to do the right things without love. And then Paul says, okay, I better tell him what love is. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Love doesn't have a swelled head. Love doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel. Listen to this, doesn't keep score of the sins of others. I was told 1 billion times, one day when you die and you stand before God, you are going to have to give a what? An accounting. And I stand there one day, God's going to say, hi, Joe, and I'm going to say, hi, God, and he's going to say, what's going on? Well, don't I have to give an accounting? And he's going to say, an accounting of what? And I say, well, the worst one was on, February 16th, and he's going to say, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any records on that stuff. What? You mean I led a miserable, sad life of guilt and shame for nothing? God's going to say, dude, that's on you. Now get out of here, you knucklehead. And off I'll go, flying without an airplane or some such thing. Takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything. I should have just said that, and we could have had like a 30-second sermon. God puts up with anything. Wait a minute. No, friends, listen. This isn't me, it's the book. The book says God puts up with anything. Love trusts. Love always looks out for the best. Love always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love never dies. Inspired speech will someday be over. Praying will end. Understanding will reach its limit. We know only a portion of the truth, and what we say about God is always incomplete. But when the complete arrives, our incompleteness will be canceled. Listen, we don't see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist, but it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see as clearly as God sees us, knowing Him just as He knows us. But for right now, until that completeness, we have three things to lead us toward that consummation. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly, and, by the way, the best of the three is love. Better than faith? Yes. Better than trust? Yes. Love. Love. And then we come to these last three phrases, the last of which I think helps me understand this. So, here's my question. How do I live like every day so that God finds me and I find Him or her? Well, this is going to sound a little bogus, but next week I want to talk about specific practices that human beings can do in order to daily access that love and experience it more fully. Because you can't just know that it's there. You have to be able to put yourself in the stream where it's flowing. And that's what I want to talk about next week. So, communion. Why do we do this? There are two big metaphors that we use. One is baptism, which, by the way, no one really understands. Why do we baptize people at the Quest? And I baptize people, and you know, when we baptize, now I was baptized as a baby, and I'm so grateful for that. But Jesus is baptized, John the Baptist is baptizing people as adults, and when he does it, he puts them under the water, and it's a beautiful metaphor. What it says is, ego, I can remember once in 1982, I was a student pastor at this church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we had baptism practice. And I held Scott Talbot under the water until the bubbles came up. It's like, see, that's the kind of thing that I'm glad God, doesn't keep track of. Okay, you were baptizing somebody and, sorry. So the ego dies and the real you is born. That's the idea. Now, we're going to have a baptism on December 4th. Someone's come forward and said, I really want to be baptized. So if you want to talk about that, then just come send me an email. Let's talk about that. The other one that we do is the tangible metaphor is communion. And the reason we do communion is because Jesus said, I want you to remember my death with a meal. You guys can come up. And why do we do it like that? Well, to remember doesn't just mean to kind of keep something in the forefront of our brain. It means when you remember someone, you kind of take on their characteristics. And so when Jesus is saying, listen, you have to understand that this life that we're living may lead to pain for you. It doesn't mean you're going to be happy and every day isn't going to be a party. And he's kind of heading down to the cross. The way of following the one is a downward way. It always is, because something in me has to die. See? It's the way of crucifixion. And so when Jesus says, remember it, he says, that meal that they had, they were on Thursday night when Jesus was betrayed, they were celebrating the Passover meal. The Passover meal harkened back to when Israel left Egypt and the death angel passed over. And so the Israeli homes, and so they were supposed to remember that every year with this Passover meal. And Jesus is eating the Passover meal with them, and he's saying, listen, this kind of life that I'm living, I want you to remember it, because this life is the real reason that the death angel will pass over and you'll really live. This life that I've lived, live it like I lived it. Not to make you wealthy and comfortable all the time, but to make you so that to make it so that you know that you're loved and you love out of that knowing. The band is going to play, and then I'll close us up right afterwards. So, Father, as we come to this table, I pray that you'd help us to remember well the life of the one who loved so beautifully. And I pray that you would help us to live in that love. In the name of the Christ, we ask this. Amen. Come when you're ready, please. So the question isn't, how do I find God? It's, how do I say yes when God finds me? And not, how do I love God, but how do I let God love me? I think that's the question we're going to get asked when we stand in front of him. He's going to say this one thing. Did you know that I loved you? Father, thank you. It's as if a warm breeze blows across our face when we realize that the things we thought were true aren't, about you especially. And I pray, God, you would help us to see and hear what is true about you. And realize that although it sounds too good to be true, this is life and beauty. And we lean into that with a deep sense of hope. And it is in the Spirit, in the name of Christ, we pray. Amen. Thanks, friends. Have a good day.
You are so beautiful.